what you see on screen, whilst might seem like a WhatsApp forward, but the reality is that most businesses that don't wake up to consumer centricity eventually are at the crossroads of whether they want to pivot or they want to wind down, because the reality is that the business exists because the consumers exist, and that's a harsh but brutal reality that we all kind of grapple with on an everyday basis. But more so for a D2C brand, because let's really question, and that's wherein lies the rub, that when we talk about D2C brands, what are the reasons why some of these brands are set up? Uh, so, in essence, when you look at the reasons to why D2C brands exist, or why brands decide that they want to set up their own commerce channels, they want an improved market reach, they want the speed to market to be lower, there are higher intake margins that can be operated with. You also end up with a situation where you can offer a much wider assortment of products. You realize that the concepts like endless aisle exist. You want to reduce your overheads and capex. More importantly, you want an inordinate revenue incremental that you can't get out of the existing channels. And in some cases, you end up doing this because, in all fairness, the competition is doing it, and therefore you want to do it. The fact is that none of these reasons actually highlight the fact that we want to do it because we want to make life simple for the consumer. And that's the irony. And when we talk about D2C, the question really for us to ask is that, is it a channel of distribution or it's an approach to run the business? And that becomes really the $1 million question. And when we are actually asking this question, we realize that D2C is not about directly selling by removing the middleman. It is about developing a relationship with the consumer. And most brands that don't kind of wrap their arms around the fact that it's about developing the relationship with the consumer don't start about thinking of the consumer journey. They start from a space of it being a means to expand the distribution network. And I don't think that works, because let's talk about when Noise was set up. And unlike most brands, we didn't start our journey with marketplaces. We didn't start our journey by saying, let's get ourselves a few distributors. When we started the journey, and the journey largely was centered around the fact that we want a consumer lifestyle, connected lifestyle solution, so to say, for our consumers. The first question that we asked ourselves was, who is it for? Who do we want to speak to? And it ended up, funny enough, but it ended up taking us about 9 months really speaking to our consumers, as long as it takes to give birth to a business, that what is it that truly will get them ticking. We started in a very different format. We started out as an accessories business, but eventually moved into the space of actually doing connected lifestyle devices for Indian consumers. And when you talk about it, the first channel of distribution that we set up was our own website. It was probably the most difficult thing to do. But we did this despite the challenges that existed, because we realized that if we don't speak to the consumer today, if we don't start taking that feedback from people who are actually engaging, interacting, and investing with us, there is no way we'll be able to fine-tune the solution and hence grow the business to scale. Sustaining brand websites is challenging. It's very, very difficult because, one, you start with limited brand awareness. Ria, you could move on to the next slide. You realize that there is a lack of consumer understanding and focus to what is it that the site will really deliver. There is a lack of seamless shopping experience because, let's face it, when you set up a website, you start by saying, you know what, I've got a beautiful website. It looks good. I've got the products up. I have a payment gateway that people can use, but that's where it all ends. And we don't even realize the huge challenge that we are going up against the might of the market share, the marketplaces. We don't realize that there is competition out there that will actually bid for the same set of keywords. We don't realize that there are people sitting in tier 2, tier 3 cities who get these so-called Instagram brands dime a dozen by the day, and there is trust deficit. And how do you build credibility whilst you're trying to build experience and also trying to be efficient and judicious? Most businesses, when they start their own websites, actually don't see efficiencies because they're not consumer centric. They start by defining the LTV CAC ratios. Let's face it, the biggest problem with an LTV CAC ratio driving a D2C business is that you define an LTV to start with, and you don't give yourself the benefit of actually having a CAC. So CAC becomes a limitation. A cost of acquisition for a consumer becomes your limitation of how many consumers can you potentially acquire, without actually having the focus with regards to what is it that the consumer will continue to come and buy from you, hence allowing you a much larger LTV, and thus the CAC. So what seems like a very simple equation on the face of it becomes extremely difficult for us to balance when you start out as a brand that does not have any other presence, but is starting out with their own brand website. This is a statement that we keep hearing. I have it all figured out. My page looks good. My listings are in place. I have a gateway. I'm ready to transact. And most businesses don't realize the gravity therein after. There are essentials, there are desirables, but there are some factors that truly determine if the consumer focus is there in the business or not. Are you being transactional about it? Are you being consumer centric? How many times do we actually think about the fact that the speed of the page loading will determine the consumer experience? How many times do we think that cart abandonment is a huge issue? Can I give my users a guest checkout option? Can I let them check out with a Facebook or a Google link? So some of those decisions, and we end up not realizing that the seamlessness of the consumer journey is what determines the success of the business. What was very relevant when we set up the business was that we were no longer playing the numbers game. We were those young, exuberant entrepreneurs saying that, you know what, for us, what truly matters here is, can we actually make lives simpler for some of our consumers? Because it stemmed from a very personal space of us not getting that solution. Gaurav, one of my co-founders, was a 24, 25-year-old actually struggling to find a solution when it came to smartwatches. And he realized that there was huge vacuum. There was bipolarity in the market where you either had an Apple or a Fitbit that you couldn't afford, or there was nothing else. And suddenly you realize that you needed a good product, a product that worked, a product that solved for the use case that I had, and hence I'm presuming that there were thousands other who had. So for us, the focus always was on trying to find the solution for ourselves. And we were very, very harsh and brutally honest to ourselves to whether we will buy a product or not. And when you start by defining the product as a solution, then you start thinking about the journey of the consumer. You don't stop by saying I've got a product, because at the end of the day, there is a transaction. And very interestingly, because we are one of those rare brands that till date, actually every week religiously, we connect with our consumers over Zoom calls. And we engage with them just to figure out how the small changes could heighten the experience for the brand. It might seem very rudimentary as to why do you still end up doing those, so to say, digital focus groups of sorts, and what does the consumer really tell you? But the fact is that there have been numerous instances where the consumer has come back, our communities have come back and given us something to really ponder about, to think about that. Are we actually giving them a solution, or are we just giving them a new product or a new campaign, or just what we think is new? Just holding on to that thought, you realize when we start putting the consumer at the forefront of everything, how every single decision starts becoming simple for you. And I'll keep taking a few examples across different functions, wherein when we were setting up logistics, we had a choice, right? You are at the end of the day shipping a product that's less than 500 grams to consumers over 6,000 pin codes. uh, you want ease, but as a startup, the focus also is that you want to bring about more efficiencies and you want to keep your costs low. So we had a predicament whether we go ahead with the best in the business that assures me a next day delivery, that ensures that every single pin code gets covered, or I end up with a solution that allows me the lowest cost. And we were very clear that it's not about getting the consumer in the store, like you were saying. It's about getting the consumer in the store again and again and again. Because if I'm not going to be able to do that today, I'll never be able to get the second customer in. And whether we like it or not, the fact is that, as I started out by saying, consumer centricity is a mindset. And it's not about saying that, you know what, we are extremely focused on what our consumers want, but we tell them what to buy. Therefore, having clear measures of success right at the beginning are very, very important. Because when most businesses move on to the journey for bridging the gap with the consumer, the real reasons are very different from the measures that are put in place. Because often you realize that the measures are with regards to ROAS, ROIs, cost per acquisition, everything that's to do with finance, everything that's to do with the profit, everything that's to do with the money. And there are no real metrics that we put in place by saying, what are the repeat rates going to be? What's the frequency with which we get the consumer come back to us? And the moment you start putting those right metrics in, you realize that your focus changes and you start putting consumer before every single decision that you take. Airbuds is a product that we launched this year in August, last year in August, which essentially was peak lockdown. We'd just gone into lockdown. People had a huge latent need of work from home. One huge use case emerged that, you know what, we need headphones that have great calling experience. Now, on the face of it, it seems something that we all take for granted, that headphones must function the way they do. But you realize that noise cancellation starts coming in. Ambient noise when you're working at home starts coming in. The mics need to be a lot more efficient. And you're trying to do all that whilst keeping the design extremely ergonomically suitable, because people are going to use these devices for 8 to 10 hours in a day, which was unheard of before. The moment you have a product like this, of course, there were solutions where you would end up paying about 14,000 rupees, but there was nothing else. And for us to go back to the drawing board and say that, you know what, let's turn this around. We turned the project working with our community in a span of about 4 months. And what we got was a mega launch where we ended up clearing about 20,000 units in 15 minutes flat. And that's the power of actually doing what the consumer wants, because they gave you a requirement, you gave them a solution, they lapped it up. Similarly, what you see on screen as Shots Rush was a product that came on the back of what our community told us. We have a very active community of runners that we engage with. Now, for runners, the biggest concern is the constant fear that the bud might fall out of the ear when you're running. We needed to do a no drop design. So we knew that we were doing a design for this community to be able to solve for a problem that was otherwise not being solved for. More interestingly, we have a hugely buoyant community of gamers. And when you talk about gamers and they want earpieces, the first requirement that they have is low latency. And for those who may not be gamers on this, that's typically the amount of time that it takes for the sound to get to your ear And for us, we worked on a solution where the industry was at 120 milliseconds. We worked on a solution at 60 milliseconds. It's still date the lowest latency product in the market. And the moment we put that product out, we realized that there were 4,000 of those that sold on the first day itself, because the gamers did not have a solution at that low latency. And there are multiple examples. I mean, I can keep going on and on. But the fact is that as a business, when you start listening to what the consumer is saying, as opposed to the mindset of, oh, I can do this. This is a product that allows me a higher intake margin. This is a product that allows for me to compete with so-and-so brand. Then you don't put the consumer at the front of it. And let's not flatter ourselves. There is only as much that you can do by virtue of listening and therefore acting on it. Also, very, very interestingly, when you talk about building a relationship, I think Saif has managed to put in a question in the chat, and I'm going to just take that for everybody. That when you talk about consumer feedback and their pain points and working on those, I think, Saif, what you are saying is the harsh reality of every single business. The fact is that when you make a product, it's a solution that appeals to a certain group of people. And there are others who are not very happy with it. It could be because of the product quality not being up to mark. It could be because the solution was not apt for you. It could be a case of me miscommunicating and not getting the point across. For us, that is very, very important. As a brand, when you hit scale, that is when you realize that some of these processes need to go to process centricity as opposed to people centricity. And what we have is a 100-member team that actually works on redressing these problems, the consumer care team. And to answer this, I'll tell you the height of consumer centricity, where we've had to take decisions where it hurt the business, but we knew that it was good for the business in the long haul. And I'll give you the example. We launched a product about 2 years ago. It was a truly wireless device that we launched. We outdid ourselves in trying to push the envelope for innovation, and it was the best product in the market back then. We realized that there was a technical production glitch that led to a certain problem for consumers. We not only pulled the products out, we gave replacements, and we stopped that product at the height of what the product was doing in the market. I mean, in terms of the loss of sale opportunity, it was massive. And as a brand, you only have that toss-up, right? That's the trade-off. That do I continue to push a product that I know is not meeting my own good, or do you just stop? And we stopped, we corrected, we fixed the problem, we relaunched the product, we replaced every single product that had gone out to people who could not manage to return it. And at till date, that remains the evidence for how we've run this business. It's very important for us to decode the consumer. And I think this is the holy grail, right? We keep talking about the fact that let's understand the consumer. One huge question is that we end up actually, as marketers and as business custodians, spending time on, unfortunately, the proverbial 4 Ps start coming into play, and we start thinking the where and the what and the how, and those questions start kind of cluttering the mind. What we don't realize is that choice of media vehicle, choice of the campaign, and how you're going to sell is all subservient to who you are speaking to. And defining, therefore, the who can sometimes help you define the where, what, and the how. And as a business, that is your reality. A lot of times, business custodians make the mistake of actually confusing the desired audience, the desired TG that you are actually communicating to in your marketing communication, or the desired positioning in terms of the message that you are actually putting out in your advertisements as your reality. And that's never your reality. Your reality is always in the minds of the consumers. Your positioning does not exist on a piece of paper, it exists in the minds of consumers. And that is the reality that you all work towards. So there is that positioning, the projection perception mismatch is what you have to constantly keep addressing. Of course, you want to speak to a certain audience, the who that you want to get the message to. But the who here is the who is it that is buying from you as a brand. And therefore, you have to invest in listening as opposed to hearing. You have to find means of having a dialogue with your consumer. You have to find out ways of actually uh, putting team and monies as simple as that to try to have a dialogue with that consumer. We have a very active team that actually works with social listening, with community engagement, with R&D. And when you talk about data, the data is not just first party data, right? For a D2C brand, the first party data is your strength. This is the data that we all talk about capturing. These are customers who bought from you. But when you talk about third party data, consumers who are transacting over marketplace platforms like an Amazon or a Flipkart, what do you do about that data? Because that's not a data that's flowing to you. So for us as a business, we were sure that we needed to crack a means for consumers who were transacting on other platforms also to find a common ground. And whether you're registering for your warranty or whether you're activating your device, all of that happens over a unified platform for us to be able to track that. Because the moment you set a goal for saying repeats, and then you can't attribute repeats to saying a consumer transacted on one platform and on the other, and then you don't know who that consumer was, the purpose gets defeated. The important point here, however, is that the consumer is evolving. We keep defining for ourselves, this is a consumer that I speak to, this is the slice of data, this is a view that we want to build. You have various models to kind of slice and dice all of it. But you have to realize that the consumer is evolving. The biggest predicament that brands constantly keep grappling with is the predicament of, do I evolve with my consumers or do I remain true to my positioning and let the consumers evolve to the brand? And I don't know the answer to it, but I know for sure that if you keep your ears to the ground and if you keep listening to what the consumers are saying, to what they want out of your brand, the answer partly lies in being honest to listening to what the consumer is telling you. And sometimes one bad experience is good to give you a wake-up call. Most often when we are reading data, we start looking at data aberrations. We start looking at outliers. For us, when we are reading data, we read it on a 4-point scale. There is no 5-point scale. There is nothing like just about okay. So it's good, very good, bad, or very bad. And that's the only way to read data. It's either green or it's red. It's either black or it's white. There is no other way of reading data. So in all fairness, just to conclude the consumer decoding piece, I'd say it's important to embrace who you are. It's important to embrace and accept and acknowledge the consumer that is shopping from you, engage with them, and then learn to evolve. There will always be a point in time that the business will need to pivot, the business will need to adapt, the business will need to evolve to the needs of the consumers. So those 3 E's, and I'll repeat them for you: embrace, engage, and evolve. And if you're going to do that, I think to a large extent, this consumer journey will just become. When I talk about consumers having evolved and being in that constant state of evolution, you have to realize that they are more demanding than ever. I think the consumer today is a lot more aware, evolved, exposed, so to say. 61% of the consumers are willing to share more information with brands if it only allows for better shopping experience. They're willing to give you the details. They're willing to save those details with you. They're willing to accept cookies. They're willing to do everything that it takes so long as their journey is easy. How many of us here on this group who actually go and transact without leaving digital footprints. 54% of the consumers expect to receive personalized offers and discounts within 24 hours. Whether a brand goes about giving or not is a separate issue, but the fact is that they expect that the brand will engage with you in 24 hours. That's the more interesting piece. 26% of the consumers believe that improved security and user experience on gateway facilitates their transaction because there is that trust factor on a D2C platforms. More importantly, 22% customers, that's almost a fourth, are okay to decide if the speed of delivery is the same day or the next day. And that is very, very interesting, right? Because none of this is stuff that you think of when you're incepting the business. That how much would it be? And in our case, we're an extremely impulse driven category when it comes to our truly wireless audio, because it's hugely lifestyle tech. When it comes to watches, people want to take time. They want to research. There is about 5 to 6 touch points that they actually go through. They want to see reviews, whether they're text or video. They want to compare. They want to speak to friends. And that journey allows them to take a decision in about a 7 to 10 day window. But when it comes to audio, there are multiple use cases, right? You're traveling tomorrow. You've got calls to take from home. You've got a vacation. You've got a flight where you need something for noise cancellation. You suddenly decide that I'm on fitness and I'm working out in the gym, and the way I've bought myself new shoes, I need something which is going to take care of sweat and not fall out of the ear. There is multiple use cases that come about. And people are buying those devices in quantum. There is very few users that we come across who have just one audio device. They have multiple devices. And the moment you have a category that's extremely impulse driven, your experience pretty much determines whether they're going to transact with you or with somebody else. The fact is that every single touch point with the consumer is a moment of truth for the brand. When you talk about brands, whether it's the consumer, it's the ordering process, it's the payment process, the delivery, the reviews, all of it, the entire consumer journey, every single touch point has to be sensitized to a consumer experience. And if it's not, then trust me, then you're not a consumer-centric brand. When you talk about hosting, when you talk about order management, when you talk about fraud management, when you talk about packaging, when you talk about logistics, returns, after sales, how the consumer data is stored, how are you planning and forecasting demand? All of these factors in a business that claims to be a D2C or a consumer-centric business need to take an outside-in view in terms of what will be best for the consumer. And trust me, and this is how I'd like to conclude it, what is good for the consumer is good for the business. So that's all I wanted to say. That's what we've learned. That's how we've gotten to success. We keep investing in putting consumer centricity in everything that we do. When you talk about competing with brands, you're actually never competing with brands, because brands actually have very different resources and competencies available at their disposal. I mean, it's basically like saying Indian athletes don't do well at gymnastics. We just don't have it in us. We can train for it, but there is genetics. And similarly, there is DNA that exists in every business. And it takes time. It's not that we can't do well at gymnastics. There are examples where we've actually gone as close to getting a medal, but the fact is that it takes an overhaul. And to be honest, who you compete with is the consumer mindset. You don't compete with a brand. And when you're competing with the mind space of a consumer, it's to do with, can you cut through the clutter and get your brand message across? And if the brand message resonates with the consumer, chances are you will get your customer transacting. But if your brand message doesn't land, then just be gracious enough to accept that, one, either you're not a match for that consumer, or you're not doing a right job of communicating with them. And it could be, it's the entire journey, right? It's just not the communication. It's, do I have the right product for that consumer? Do I have the right communication for that consumer? Am I delivering the right solution? Do I have the experience that the customer expected from me? So that is one part. That's a very outside in view. There is an inside out view in terms of how we are competing. And when you're saying a lot of brands are cluttering this space, you're absolutely right. At last count, there were 130 odd brands and increasing by the day. So it's not that the big boys haven't played this game. They've been around. Most of the brands that you can think of are operating in this space. And the fact that Noise has continued to be the market leader with a market share in excess of 26-27% quarter on quarter is to do with the fact that, one, we've been at the forefront of innovation. Till date, we've got about 9 industry firsts that we brought to the market. 2, we're always sensitive to the fact that at the end of the day, it's not a transaction, it's a consumer that you're dealing with. And hence, continue to come up with solutions, so to say, like some of those that I shared with you that resonate with our community. We invest heavily in terms of driving experiences for the community that continues to grow. And thereafter, the best form of marketing that we like to call word of mouth takes off for us. And for a first-time user, when they see great reviews, great responses, people talking about the brand, they start developing a sense of trust. And thereafter, it's a typical funnel, right? The moment you bring them from awareness to consideration, then it's the real funnel coming into play. Trust me, I learned it the hard way, having done this 20 years, that you do what you do best and outsource the rest. So if you reckon that your strength really lies in consumers, by all means, invest in building a marketplace where you could have homogeneous products that don't compete with one another selling out. And if you reckon your expertise is in dealing with craftsmen, creating good products, and building a brand, then continue to do that and leave the retailing to somebody else. So I'd say find out what your real competency is with your team, and that should be the route for you to take. The first bit is that in the existing format, we end up doing as much on our own portal as I end up doing on some of the marketplaces individually, if not more. The question really here is for you to define the objective to why you need a marketplace in your overall retail mix. And the answer to that is that not every customer that you get is aware of who you are or is a brand customer. There is an Amazon customer who will shop on Amazon regardless. And what you ask is a slightly more fundamental question to whether a brand should operate out of their own stores or rely on somebody else to sell the products for them. To my mind, I think both will exist. In fact, there are richer, newer mediums that are emerging for digital commerce. They will also come and clutter this space up a little more. But I think more fundamentally, you have to ask yourself why you need a retail partner, and can you do something like that without their intervention? To my mind, it's a slightly difficult ploy, but by all means you can, because we hit scale with our own website. It's only that we realized that there were people who we would alienate otherwise, or not be able to reach out to, or end up taking longer time reaching out to. And hence, some of these partnerships are helpful. The experience on your own website and on a marketplace is very different. On a brand web store, the brand experience is a lot richer. But there are others who would rely on that standardized Amazon, Flipkart, la experience that they'll be happier going ahead with. And let the customer choose for you as opposed to you choosing for the customer. There is a learning curve to all of this, and not that we get it right every day. We make our mistakes, but if you can benefit from the mistakes that I've made over my career, at least you'll not end up making those. So thank you. Glad I could share some of my experiences.